Hey gang, today we're going to do a lesson on diminished lines in the blues. Now, I got hooked on this listening to Robben Ford's 1987 or 1988 album, Talk to Your Daughter. There's a song in there, Help the Poor, that the solo in there just kind of blew me away. And I've been chasing it ever since. But I think there's some diminished lines in there. I know Robben Ford uses a lot of diminished lines in his solo. And they always mystified me when I was younger and tried to play them. Even when I knew the diminished scale, it was hard for me to think about how it fit into the rest of the blues and where I could put in a line that made sense and then how to make it work. The other thing was that I often got lost. The diminished scale, I learned a couple of forms of it and I was always getting lost. So today, what I want to show you is not only what I played in the opening there, but a form of the scale that stays put and then is connected with chords. One of the things that's kind of true about a diminished scale is that it's used as you're transitioning from one chord to another. A diminished scale can be helpful, or a diminished line can be helpful in moving from one chord to another. So if we learn how to connect them or tie a particular form to a chord and then think about the chord we're going to, it's going to help a lot. All right, anyway, I don't want to inundate you with theory. We'll get mostly the lines, and then I'll show you where you can use them. A couple of typical places in the blues where you can use diminished lines, and we'll call it a day. Okay, as usual, if you like this lesson, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't yet, subscribe for one of these every week. We'll see you in just a second. Okay, gang. Let's go over this note for note. Before we do, make sure you download the tab this time and maybe even print it out. It's going to help you a lot, I think, especially on those diminished lines. All right, first thing I want to do is I'm going to play the whole thing slowly. I'm going to point out where those diminished lines are, what those diminished lines are, and then why they are where they are. Okay? So here we go. So we're just going to start out in G. This is a blues in G, so there's only 3 chords, G, C7, and a D7, right? So we start out in G. Here we go. All normal blues. Still normal blues, okay? Here we go. Now here's the diminished line. C7, okay? So that's over the last bar of G7. We're headed toward that C7. Let me play that again. Okay, that's a little C9 chord I played. If you don't know that one, cool chord. 4-3-2 strings, 4-3-2-1 strings. It's 8, 7, 5, and 8. Okay, so now we made it to the C chord. Diminished scales are always used in transition from one chord to another. In this case, from the 1 to the 4 chord. It's a great place to put a diminished line in there. So the diminished scale can be used that way. Now we just play a couple of other blues lines here. Back to the G7. Okay, here we go to the D7. D7. Okay, C7. Very cool line there. Let me play that a little bit slower. Okay. Now back to the G7. Now to the D7. Here we go. Another diminished line. Okay, now I think you can understand the rest of the stuff. The rest of the stuff is just really straight blues. I tried to play pretty, I like the lines that I used, I like those blues lines, but they're pretty normal blues. And so the only places that we're playing the diminished runs are from the G7 as it's going to the C7, and that happens to be a 1 to a 4. So that's a great place to throw in a diminished line. Now, you don't want to throw in diminished lines all the time. In fact, I threw in 2 in that solo. It's really 1 too many because the diminished line can be a little bit shocking, so you don't want to use it all the time. Okay? So that's one place you can use it, however, from the 1 to the 4, a very natural place to use it. The second natural place to use it is going from the 5 chord back to the 1. Now, if you think about it, this is going to be a little bit screwy, but it's going to make some sense. We already showed that going from the 1 chord to the 4 chord works for the diminished, right? Well, in this case, we've got a D7, which is our 5 chord, and we're saying that also going back to the 1 makes sense, the G7. Well, if you think about it, if we were playing a blues in D, the 1 chord would be the D7, the 4 chord would be the G. So D7 to G7 is really just an example of a 1 to a 4, even though in this case it's the 5 back to the 1 chord. Confused? Yeah, it's a bit confusing, but if you think about it, it makes sense. Going from the D to the G makes sense because a G is the 4 chord in a D blues. So we can use the diminished scale there as well. So those are the 2 places that we can use it. And I mentioned in the opening that a diminished line works best over a transition. So it's always of a transition from one chord to the other. Diminished lines really are kind of dissonant sounding, so they need to go somewhere and resolve. And they always have. That's why they're always a chord of, or are always a chord of movement. And so if we can resolve them well on the next chord, it works. All right. So let me give you a pattern that one of the things that I mentioned in the opening was that the diminished scale never really worked for me because I always got lost, right? So when I learned it, it was learned as double diminished, and a double diminished is really a series of half steps and whole steps. Okay, so if we were going to play it all on one string, it would be a half step. Let's play it in G. G to a half step would be this, then a whole step, then a half step, then a whole step, then a half step, then a whole step, then a half step, then a whole step. Okay, well that kind of stinks if I'm just going to play it on one string. And in fact, if I'm thinking of a G diminished, what about this note right there? Is that in the G diminished? Well, I can't tell you. I don't know, because I have to figure it out from the bass. No, it's not. All right? So that's not very helpful. So the next thing somebody showed me was, oh, well, there's a pattern if you go up a string, like you do this. And then you move up one fret and do the same pattern. And then do the same thing up one fret. And do the same thing up one fret. And now it's a little bit weird because you got to move up 2 because of the tuning of the B string. That wasn't working for me either because it's, again, if I pick a place here, it's going all the way up the neck. It's tough. So I always was hoping for something that was stationary, that I could think about a position and I could play that. Well, there is a format where you can do that, and it works great on the first 3 strings, and it works okay on the first 4 strings. So first thing I want us to do is think about this G7 chord right here, okay? And if we think about only the 4, 3, and 2 strings, we get this. Right? Which is 3, 4, and 3. Now, you don't usually think about it this way, but a 7th chord is actually very, very close to a diminished chord because it's really just one note away. Instead of playing this, I'm going to play my G as a G sharp, and it's going to be a G sharp diminished. So check this out. So all I did was I changed the bass note, and it gives me a totally different character. It gives me that diminished. Likewise, I could change the G on the top here. If I played that top string, which is a G, and then just played the G sharp, I'd get this, which is my diminished, right? So I can actually think of that core of the G7 chord as a diminished. And the pattern that I think of, it's really simple. I'm going to start by doing our half step, whole step, just to prove that it's there. So if we start on the top string, this is a G on the 3rd fret, and we do a half step and then a whole step and a half step, we get this. And so on. Right? But I'm going to stop right here. And so I have a pattern here. And all that works great. So it's, let me just play you that pattern. It is 6, 4, 3, and then 6, 5, 3, and then the next one is 6, 4, 3, and the next one is 6, 5, 3. All right, and then we can cap it with one note on the bottom and one note on the top. And that's our pattern. And so it's kind of easy just to rip that one off. And it works. Okay, so that is for that form. So when you think of this G7, you can play that line. And you play it over a few times and get used to it. And so when you play that G7 chord, it's linked to that chord. You can play that diminished scale in that position. You can play permutations of it. You know, that kind of stuff, and you get good at it. Okay, so that's one form. Now, the second form we want to think of is this form with the root. That's the root on the 6th string. The next one is the root on the 5th string. So here I've got the 10th, right? That's my root. That's a G on the 5th string. And then if I play 12, 10, and 12 on the 4th, 3, and 2 strings, respectively, that's also a diminished. Okay? Now it turns out that I get the same pattern if I play in here. So check it out. So if I play... All right. So anyway, so that one right there. If I play, I'll just detail the things. I'll play 12. Oops, I'm sorry. Yeah, 12 on the 1st string. 12, 10, 9. Then 12, 11, 9. Then 12, 10, 9. Then 12, 11, 9. And I cap it same way. One below on the 4th and one above on the 1st. Let me play the whole thing now. But that is exactly the same pattern that we had with that other chord form. It's just in a different place. So now I know 2 places I can play that diminished, right? All right. Now, this is probably, it's either going to blow your mind or you already know this, but you can take any diminished form and move it up or down 3 frets and it's the same. Yeah, that's right. So if I take this, I move it down 3, it's the same. It's the same chord, and so it's going to be the same scale around that chord. Move it down another 3. that works as well. So the interesting thing is when we played this right here, it's the same pattern, same scale pattern that we played over this one. So they really do mesh. All right, so that's all that line is when we're playing from the G7 to the C7. I'm really almost just playing that pattern. Check it out. So I was playing from the G to the C7. I'm aiming for this note, which is a C chord tone. All right, so here's what I played. I'll play it slowly. And then, bam, I'm on the 1. Pretty neat, huh? So I didn't have to memorize all those patterns or anything like that. I just used that 1 based on that chord. As long as I end up on my feet, I'm good. All right, here is the last one too. In the last one, we're playing the D7. We're doing this, right? We're doing G7, D7, back to the 1. So it's over that last D7 that we're playing our diminished line. Now if I think about it right here, okay, that's my D7 chord, right? Root on a 10th fret, 6th string. That's my D7 chord. I can play the same line that I had before. That would have worked. Of course, I don't want to play exactly the same line this time. So basically, I'm just going to play it going down this time. Oops, let me play it again. And this is the 3rd of G. That G chord right there. So the line that I played was actually this. Let me play it very, very slowly. Starting with the 14th fret on the 1st string. That's the last line. The 4th string, 9th fret. And what I wanted to show you was this is a G chord right here. Right? So this is actually the 3rd of a G chord. It's a chord tone. So I ended, in this case, on the 3rd. But if you think about landing on chord tones, you're not going to go wrong, right? That works. That's a little diminished line. It's not as grand as the other one, but it does end up on something that works. So that's about it, folks. Again, you can do that whole solo. We played it nice and slowly. You've got the tab for it. Now you've got those 2 diminished lines. You've got those 2 patterns that you can use over each of those chord forms. And they really work. Oh, one last thing I wanted to show you was we could have used, instead of this chord form, we could have used this D7, right? And the claim is that this is the diminished scale. Okay, the claim is that that's the diminished scale that works over that chord form. So we maybe could have played something like this. First of all, is it the same? It looks like it is. It's the same as scale. But the claim is we could have done something like this. So we're going to maybe target, what if we targeted this note, which is the 3rd, or we could target this note, which is the 1st, or really be bold and target this note, which is the 7th. Let me maybe try that. That would work. I don't know if that sounded great, but that would be okay. So we could use those diminished lines out of those as well. Well, there you go, gang. diminished lines, a little bit about where they can go in the blues, how they're tied to those two chord forms that I showed you, and now you have a couple of examples of how to use them as well. All right, I hope you enjoyed this one. I like this sort of thing a lot, so let me know if you want more of it, okay? We'll see you on down the road.